There is a specific look people give you when you are 59 years old, dying of stage 4 cancer, and walking down the aisle toward a man who is 34. It's a mix of pity and disgust. I saw it in the registrar's eyes, I saw it in the whispers of the nurses, and I certainly saw it in the furious, tear-stained faces of my adult children sitting in the front row. They think they know the story. The rich, dying widow, the desperate need to feel young one last time, the handsome predator waiting for the heart monitor to flatline so he can cash the check. It's a cliché, isn't it? The Anna Nicole Smith of the hospice ward. But they are wrong. Julian didn't marry me for the millions I made writing romance novels. He didn't marry me for the estate on the cliffs. He married me knowing that in 3 months he would be a widower. He married me knowing he would have to change my bandages, hold my hair back when the chemo made me sick, and watch the light fade from my eyes. And the reason I know with absolute terrifying certainty that he didn't do it for the money, because 10 minutes before we said I do, I signed a new will, a will that leaves him absolutely nothing. And he was the one who handed me the pen. I'm Evelyn. I'm dying. And this is the story of how I lived more in my final 90 days than I did in the previous 59 years. 6 months ago, my life was perfect, or at least perfectly curated. I was Evelyn St. James, best-selling author, widow of a tech magnate. I lived in Graycliff, a sprawling estate on the Oregon coast where the waves crashed against the rocks day and night. I had respect. I had solitude. I had a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses. Then came the stomach pains, then the fatigue, then the word that changes everything. Pancreatic. Unresectable, the doctor said. Aggressive. You have 6 months, Evelyn, maybe a year with treatment. But the quality of life. He trailed off. I drove home in my vintage Jaguar. I didn't cry. I felt a strange sense of clarity. The clock had started. I walked into my house, my beautiful empty museum of a house, and realized I had accumulated a lot of things, but very few memories. My husband, Charles, had been dead for 10 years. He was a good man, but boring. We had a sensible marriage. My children, Clara and Marcus, were grown. Clara was a socialite in New York. Marcus was a venture capitalist in San Francisco. They called on holidays. They called when they needed capital. I looked at my library, 5,000 books, rare manuscripts, first editions. If I died tomorrow, Clara would sell them to a bulk dealer without blinking. I couldn't let that happen. I decided to hire a private archivist, someone to catalog the collection to ensure it went to a museum, not an auction house. I put out an ad. Wanted, expert archivist, short-term contract, must be willing to live on site, discretion required. I expected a retired librarian or a stuffy academic in a tweed jacket. I got Julian. He arrived in a rainstorm. I opened the heavy oak door. He was standing there, dripping wet. He wore a beaten-up trench coat and boots that had seen better days. He looked hungry, not for food, but for life. He was 34, though he had eyes that looked 100. Mrs. St. James? He asked. His voice was soft, baritone. You're late, I said, leaning on my cane. The pain had started to affect my walking. My motorcycle broke down a mile back, he said unapologetically. I walked. I let him in. He didn't look at the crystal chandelier. He didn't look at the ocean view. He looked straight at the wall of books. He walked over to a first edition of Jane Eyre. He didn't touch it. He just leaned in and inhaled. You keep the humidity at 45%, he said, turning to me. That's good. Most people let them rot. I'm Julian, he said, finally looking at me. He didn't look at the cane. He didn't look at the gray tint to my skin or the hollows under my eyes. He looked me dead in the eye. You're young, I said dryly. And you're skeptical, he countered. Give me a week. If I don't treat your books better than I treat myself, fire me. I hired him. He moved into the guest cottage. For the first 2 weeks, he was a ghost. I would find him on ladders, dusting, cataloging, muttering to himself. I watched him from my armchair. The chemo had started, and I was weak. I spent my days wrapped in cashmere blankets, feeling the cold seep into my bones. One afternoon, I dropped my teacup. My hands had started shaking, a side effect. The china shattered. The hot tea splashed my legs. I couldn't move to clean it up. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Not from pain, but from humiliation. The great Evelyn St. James, unable to hold a cup. Julian appeared. I hadn't heard him enter. He didn't gasp. He didn't make a fuss. He knelt down. He picked up the shards with his bare hands. He took a towel and gently dabbed the tea from my slippers. "I'm a mess," I whispered. "You're tired," he corrected. "There's a difference." He looked up at me from the floor. "My mother died of this," he said quietly. "I know the look, Evelyn. You don't have to hide it from me." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged the reality without flinching. "It hurts," I admitted. "I know," he said. "Do you want me to read to you? It helps with the noise in your head." He picked up Jane Eyre. He sat on the floor by my feet. He read for 3 hours. His voice was a balm. And for the first time in months, I fell asleep without pain medication. The relationship didn't start with romance. It started with dignity. My children, when they deigned to visit, treated me like a porcelain doll that was already broken. They spoke in hushed tones. They talked about arrangements. Julian treated me like a woman who was still alive. He argued with me about literature. Bronte was a masochist, he'd say, pouring me wine, which the doctor forbid, but Julian said, "Who cares? Enjoy the taste." Bronte was a realist, I'd argue back, feeling the spark of wit return to my brain. He started driving me to my appointments. He sat in the chemo ward, holding my hand, reading bad poetry from magazines to make me laugh. He saw me throw up. He saw me bald. I started wearing turbans. He saw the ugly, visceral reality of dying, and he never looked away. One night, the pain was bad. I was in bed, groaning. Julian came in. He had a bottle of oil. "My mom swore by lavender for the cramping," he said. "Julian, you shouldn't be here. It's inappropriate." "Shut up, Evelyn," he said gently. He sat on the edge of the bed. He warmed the oil in his hands. He began to massage my feet. Then my calves. His hands were strong, rhythmic. The touch was shocking. I hadn't been touched with anything other than a medical glove in so long. I looked at him in the dim light, the way his hair fell over his forehead, the concentration on his face. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. "You're an archivist, not a nurse." "I'm doing this because I like you," he said, "and I hate seeing you in pain." He looked up. His hand rested on my ankle. "You have beautiful legs," he said. I laughed, a harsh sound. "They're wasting away. They're elegant," he insisted, "like the rest of you." He moved up the bed. He didn't kiss me then. He just lay down on top of the covers, beside me. He wrapped his arm around my waist, holding me together. I fell asleep inhaling the scent of old paper and rain that clung to his skin. I realized then that I was falling in love with him, and I realized how cruel it was to love someone when you are about to leave them. 3 months in, my children came for an emergency visit. Translation, they heard about Julian. They sat at my long mahogany dining table. Clara checked her Rolex every 5 minutes. Marcus was texting under the table. Julian sat to my right. "So?" Marcus started, cutting his steak aggressively. "Julian, is it? Mom says you're an archivist." "That's right," Julian said. "And does archiving usually involve living in the main house?" Clara asked, raising a perfectly arched eyebrow. I had moved Julian into the room next to mine so he could hear me if I called out at night. "It involves being where the collection is," Julian said smoothly. "Mom," Clara turned to me, "we're concerned. You're vulnerable right now, and having a stranger in the house. A young male stranger. It looks odd." "Odd to whom?" I asked. "To the estate lawyers," Marcus said bluntly. "We've looked into him, Mom. He has student debt. He drives a bike worth $500. He's a grifter." Julian didn't flinch. He continued eating. "I'm right here," Julian said. "If you want to check my bank account, feel free. It's currently at $200. "Exactly." Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "You're broke, and you found a golden goose." "Stop it," I commanded. My voice was weak, but it silenced the room. Julian is the only person who asks me how I feel, not how the portfolio is performing. He is the only one who knows what music I want played at my funeral. I looked at my children. "He stays. If you don't like it, you can leave. I'm sure you have flights to catch." They left in a huff, muttering about competency hearings and undue influence. I slumped in my chair, exhausted. Julian walked over. He knelt beside me. "They're right, you know," he said softly. "About what? I am broke, and I am young, and to the world, I look like a villain." I touched his face. "Do you want my money, Julian?" He laughed. "Evelyn, I'm a minimalist. I own books and a bike. What would I do with an estate? Mow the lawn for eternity?" He kissed my palm. "I don't want your money. I want your time, whatever is left of it." The decline happened fast. By month 4, I couldn't walk. I was confined to the wheelchair. I knew the end was coming. I could feel the cold creeping up my extremities. We were watching the sunset. "I'm scared," I admitted to him. "Not of dying, but of being forgotten." "You won't be forgotten," Julian said. "I've archived your life. It's all there. Books collect dust," I said. I want to belong to someone at the end. I don't want to die as the widow St. James. I want to die as—" I couldn't say it. Julian stood up. He walked over to me. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a diamond ring. He pulled out a piece of sea glass he had found on the beach. It was wrapped in copper wire to make a crude ring. "Marry me," he said. I stared at him. "Julian, be serious." "I am. Marry me, Evelyn." "I'm dying," I whispered. "I have maybe 2 months. You'd be a 25-year-old widower. People will tear you apart. They'll say you did it for the inheritance." "Let them say it," he said fiercely. "I don't care about them. I care about you. I want the right to be in the room when you take your last breath. I want the right to hold your hand without the nurses asking if I'm family. I want to be your family." He slid the sea glass ring onto my finger. It was cold and rough and perfect. "I can't promise you forever," he said, his voice cracking, "but I can promise you for now. And right now is all we have." I looked at this beautiful, foolish man. I thought about my children, checking their watches. I thought about the empty years I spent with Charles. "Yes," I said. "Yes." We set the date for 2 weeks later, but first we had to handle the business. I summoned my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. "We're getting married," I told him. Mr. Henderson looked at Julian like he was a cockroach. "Evelyn," he sighed, "I strongly advise against this. Without a prenup—" "There will be a prenup," Julian interrupted. Mr. Henderson blinked. "Oh, yes," Julian said. "I want a document stating that in the event of Evelyn's death, I receive nothing. No assets, no cash, no property, nothing." The room went silent. Mr. Henderson looked confused. "Nothing? But spousal rights?" "Waived," Julian said. "Draft it. I'll sign it." I looked at Julian. I hadn't asked him to do this. "Julian," I whispered, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he said. "I want you to know, and I want them to know." Mr. Henderson drafted it. Julian signed it without reading the fine print. But I wasn't done. "There's one more thing," I told Mr. Henderson. "Yes, Evelyn?" "I want to change my will." I pulled out a folder. "My children think Julian is a gold digger. They think he's influencing me. So I'm removing the variable." I looked at Mr. Henderson. "Liquidate the estate. Sell the house. Sell the art. The proceeds, 100% of them, go to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. My children get the trust funds their father left them, and nothing more. And Julian gets nothing." Julian squeezed my hand. He was smiling. "Perfect," he said. Mr. Henderson looked at us like we were insane. "You're disinheriting everyone?" "I'm freeing everyone," I said. "Draft it." My wedding day was not the fairy tale I wrote about in my novels. There was no grand cathedral. There was no organ music. There was just the sound of the oxygen machine puffing rhythmically beside me and the crashing of the waves against the cliffs. I insisted on walking. "Evelyn, you don't have to," Julian whispered, bending down to my ear. "I can push you." "No," I said, gripping his arm with my skeletal hand. "I am walking to you." It took everything I had, every ounce of energy. I stood up, my legs trembled violently. The pain was a dull roar in my spine. But I took a step, then another. I saw the faces of the 20 guests. My children, Clara and Marcus, looked like they were at a funeral. They were checking their phones. They were rolling their eyes. To them, this was a grotesque display of a dying woman's delusion. But then I looked at Julian. He wasn't looking at my trembling legs. He wasn't looking at the turban covering my bald head. He was looking at me. He looked at me with a reverence that made me feel like I was 20 years old and invincible. I made it to the fireplace. I collapsed into the chair they had set up. We said our vows. I, Julian, take you, Evelyn, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. His voice broke on sickness. He squeezed my hand so hard I thought he might crush the sea glass ring. Until death parts us. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Julian didn't kiss me delicately. He leaned down and kissed me with a passion that silenced the room. For a moment, the cancer didn't exist. The money didn't exist. There was only us. We were married for exactly 42 days. They were the hardest and most beautiful days of my life. The decline was steep. I stopped being able to eat. I stopped being able to leave the bed. Julian became my world. He bathed me with a sponge, singing soft songs so I wouldn't feel the humiliation of my own body failing. He read to me. We finished Jane Eyre. We read Wuthering Heights. He read me my own books, his voice bringing my characters to life one last time. My children stopped visiting. It's too hard to watch, Clara said on the phone. Call us when, they were waiting for the end. They were waiting for the payout. One night, the pain was gone. That's when you know it's close. The body gives up the fight. A strange clarity washed over me. Julian, I whispered. He woke up instantly from the chair. I'm here. Open the window. I want to hear the ocean. He opened the French doors. The cold, salty air filled the room. He climbed into bed with me. He held me. Against his chest, I could feel his heartbeat, strong, steady, alive. You changed the ending, I murmured. What ending? He asked, stroking my arm. My story. I thought it was a tragedy. You turned it into a romance. He buried his face in my neck. I felt his tears. I love you, Evelyn. Go. It's okay. I've got you. You have the manuscript? I asked, my voice fading. I have it. It's safe. Good. That's for you. I closed my eyes. I listened to the waves. I listened to his breath. And then I simply let go. I wasn't there for this part, obviously. But I wrote the script. I know exactly how it played out. The funeral was lavish. Clara organized it. She cried on cue. She accepted condolences. But the real event was the reading of the will. They gathered in Mr. Henderson's office. Clara and Marcus sat on the leather sofa, already mentally spending their millions. Julian sat in the corner chair staring at the floor. Let's get this over with, Marcus said, checking his watch. We know the drill. Julian gets his whatever Mom gave him, and we split the estate. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses. He looked nervous. Actually, Mr. Henderson said, Evelyn updated her last will and testament 2 weeks before her death. Clara froze. Updated? Updated how? She was very clear, Mr. Henderson said. She wanted to ensure that her legacy was one of philanthropy. He began to read. I, Evelyn St. James, being of sound mind, do hereby order the liquidation of all my assets, the Grey Cliff estate, the literary rights, the art collection, the investment accounts. Marcus smiled. Liquidation. Good. Cash is better. The total proceeds of said liquidation, Mr. Henderson continued, his voice shaking slightly, are to be donated in full to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital to fund a new wing for pediatric oncology. The silence was deafening. Excuse me? Clara stood up. Did you say in full? Yes, Mr. Henderson said. 100%. What about us? Marcus shouted. We're her children. You received your trust funds from your father, Mr. Henderson read from my note. My children are capable adults. I leave them the gift of independence. Marcus turned purple. He spun around and pointed a finger at Julian. You, he screamed. You did this. You manipulated her. You got her to cut us out so you could take it all. Mr. Henderson raised a hand. Actually, Mr. St. James, Julian gets nothing either. Marcus stopped. What? Julian signed a prenuptial agreement waiving all rights, and the will explicitly states that he receives 0 financial assets. He gets nothing. The room spun for my children. They couldn't blame the gold digger. He hadn't dug any gold. Then why? Clara whispered, sinking back onto the sofa. Why would she do this? Julian finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his voice was steady. Because she wanted you to know, Julian said softly. Know what? Marcus spat. That I loved her, Julian said, and that she loved you enough to stop you from waiting for her to die. He stood up. I have to go, Julian said. I have a manuscript to edit. He walked out of the office, leaving them with their millions in trust funds, but absolutely nothing of me. I didn't leave Julian money. He wouldn't have taken it, but I didn't leave him with nothing. Mr. Henderson handed him a box in the parking lot. She wanted you to have this, he said. It wasn't part of the estate. It was a personal gift. Julian drove to his small apartment. He opened the box. Inside was a set of keys, not to the mansion, but to a small, run-down lighthouse keeper's cottage down the coast. I had bought it years ago under a pseudonym. It was filled with books. It was quiet. It was overlooking the sea, a place for him to live, a place for him to write. And underneath the keys was a manuscript typed on my old typewriter. Title? The Archivist. It wasn't fiction. It was our story. It was the story of a dying woman who found a life in a man who loved books. And, on the cover page, a note. For Julian, you archived my past. Now, write your future. The rights to this book belong to you. Publish it. Tell them the truth. That was a year ago. The Archivist spent 40 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. The world devoured the story. They cried for the dying author. They fell in love with the young man who washed her hair. The royalties from the book made Julian a wealthy man. But he didn't change. He lives in the lighthouse cottage. He tends to a garden. He still rides his beat-up motorcycle. And every evening at sunset, he walks to the edge of the cliff. He wears a piece of sea glass on a chain around his neck. My children are still fighting the will in probate court. They will lose. They will spend years bitter and angry. But Julian is free. I'm Evelyn. I died at 59. But because of him, I lived forever. Love is the only legacy that matters. If this story moved you to tears, hit like and subscribe. Share this with someone you want to hold close tonight.